I was the only person at Gerald Morrison's funeral, sitting alone in a chapel that smelled like lilies and regret, and that should have been my first clue that everything I knew about my life was a lie. The lawyer's footsteps echoed as he walked toward me, leather portfolio in hand, his expression unreadable. "Ms. Williams," he said quietly, "Mr. Morrison left specific instructions that you receive this." My fingers trembled as I took the will from him. Outside, rain hammered against the stained glass windows. Inside, my world was about to shatter into 1,000 irreparable pieces. If you've ever discovered a secret that changed everything you thought you knew about your family, hit subscribe right now, because what I found in that will expose a 30-year conspiracy that my parents built one lie at a time. But let me rewind. Let me tell you about the fence. For 30 years, Gerald Morrison lived in the gray colonial next door to my childhood home in Maple Ridge. And for 30 years, my parents treated him like a convicted criminal living just beyond our property line. I was 7 years old when my father hired contractors to build that fence, 10 feet of solid cedar panels that blocked out the sun and made our backyard feel like a prison yard. I remember my mother watching from the kitchen window, her hands shaking as she gripped her coffee mug, her knuckles white. "Good," she whispered when the last panel went up. "Now we're safe." Safe from what? I was too young to understand. Gerald was just an old man who lived alone, who sometimes stood on his porch and stared at our house with eyes that looked perpetually sad, like he'd lost something precious and could never get it back. The lawsuits started when I was 10. 3 of them, spread across 8 years, each one more vicious than the last. The first was over a property line dispute, 2 inches of land that my father insisted Gerald had encroached upon. The second involved tree roots from Gerald's oak allegedly damaging our foundation, though I never saw any cracks. The third was the ugliest, alleged harassment, claims that Gerald was watching our family, taking photos, making us feel unsafe in our own home. I remember the court dates, my mother's panic attacks in the car beforehand, my father's jaw clenched so tight I thought his teeth would crack. They won every case. Gerald lost money, dignity, peace. And through it all, he never fought back with the same venom. He just looked, defeated. Tired. Like a man serving a sentence for a crime no one would name. "He's dangerous," my mother told me repeatedly throughout my childhood, her voice taking on a sharp edge whenever his name came up. "Stay away from that man, Evelyn. He wants to hurt this family." But when I asked how, what he'd done, why he lived next door if he was so terrible, her face would go pale and she'd leave the room. My father's response was different. He'd pour himself another drink, his 3rd or 4th of the evening, and stare out at that 10-foot fence like it was a monument to something. "Some things are better left buried," he'd say, the whiskey making his words slur slightly. "That man knows things. Things that could destroy us." "What things?" He never said. The silence in our house was thick enough to choke on. Growing up, I'd sometimes catch glimpses of Gerald through the fence slats, just fragments of him, never the whole picture. An eye. A hand. The edge of his face. He looked so ordinary. So harmless. Once, when I was 12, I saw him crying on his back porch, holding a photograph I couldn't make out. Something about the way his shoulders shook made my chest ache. I wanted to ask him what was wrong, but my mother's warnings echoed in my head. Dangerous. Stay away. Wants to hurt us. So I went inside and said nothing. I've regretted that silence for 18 years. Have you ever been told someone was a monster, only to realize later that the real monsters were the people you trusted most? Drop a comment below, because what I'm about to tell you will make you question everything your parents ever taught you about good and evil. The years passed. I went to college, got married, started my own life, but my parents' hatred for Gerald never dimmed. If anything, it intensified. Every holiday I came home, there were new complaints. He was letting his yard go to weeds just to spite us, he was playing music too loud at night, he was existing too loudly in the space next door. My husband Marcus met Gerald once by accident at the grocery store and said he seemed like a perfectly kind old man who asked about me with genuine warmth. He knew your middle name, your birthday, what you studied in school, Marcus told me, confused. How does your parents' sworn enemy know more about you than most of your relatives? I didn't have an answer. The question haunted me. Last month, I got the call. Gerald had stage 4 pancreatic cancer. Weeks to live, maybe days. I don't know what possessed me, but I drove to Mercy General Hospital without telling my parents. I found his room on the 3rd floor, the door half open, machines beeping steadily beside his bed. He looked so small under those white sheets, so fragile, nothing like the dangerous man I'd been warned about for 3 decades. His eyes opened when I entered, and for a moment, recognition flickered across his face. Then something else. Relief? Grief? Love? Evelyn, he whispered, his voice like dry leaves. You look just like her. Like who? I started to ask, but nurses rushed in, telling me visiting hours were for family only, ushering me out before I could demand answers. I made the mistake of mentioning the visit to my parents that evening. My father's face went crimson. You went where? He roared, slamming his fist on the dining table hard enough to make the plates jump. After everything we've told you, after everything that man has put this family through, you went to see him? My mother just stood there, frozen, her face drained of all color. He tried to destroy us, she said finally, her voice barely audible. He tried to destroy our family, and you're at his bedside like he's some poor victim? But she wouldn't say how. Wouldn't explain what he'd actually done. Just that same maddening vagueness, that same wall of silence I'd been hitting my entire life. Gerald Morrison died 4 days later. No obituary in the paper. No funeral announcement. I only knew because the hospital called me, apparently I'd left my number at the nurse's station. He had no other emergency contacts, the woman told me apologetically. We thought you should know. No one else. After 73 years of life, he had no one. If you've ever felt completely alone in the world, if you've ever wondered why people become isolated and forgotten, smash that like button, because Gerald's loneliness wasn't accidental. It was engineered. And the people who engineered it were sleeping in the bedroom down the hall from mine for my entire childhood. The funeral was on a Thursday morning at Riverside Chapel, a small room with 6 rows of empty pews and a closed casket at the front. Just me, the priest, and the funeral director who kept checking his watch. No flowers except the single arrangement I'd ordered. No mourners except the woman who'd been forbidden her whole life from knowing him. I sat in the front row and cried for reasons I couldn't fully articulate, for his loneliness, for the questions I'd never asked, for the 30 years he'd lived 50 feet from my bedroom window while my parents built walls between us. After the service, the lawyer found me in the parking lot. His name was Richard Chen, and he carried himself with the careful precision of someone who'd been entrusted with secrets. Ms. Williams, I'm the executor of Mr. Morrison's estate. He left very specific instructions regarding you. He handed me the portfolio. Inside was a will, notarized and official. I scanned the first page and my breath caught. The house. His savings account. Investment portfolios. Everything. Gerald Morrison had left me everything. But I barely knew him, I stammered. Why would he? There's a letter, Mr. Chen interrupted gently. He wanted you to read it before we proceed with anything else. His eyes held something like pity. Ms. Williams, I think you should sit down for this. I didn't sit. I opened the letter right there in the parking lot, rain starting to fall again, droplets blurring the ink on the page. The first line made my knees buckle, your parents know what they did. My hand shook as I kept reading. 30 years ago, there was an accident. A little girl died. Your father was driving. I was the only witness. The words swam before my eyes. An accident. A death. My father behind the wheel. Gerald as the witness. Suddenly the 30-year vendetta made horrifying sense. The fence wasn't for protection, it was to hide guilt. The lawsuits weren't about property lines, they were about silencing the only person who knew the truth. He is dangerous, my mother had said. Dangerous because he could destroy them with a single conversation. Dangerous because he represented consequences they'd spent 3 decades running from. But the next paragraph made everything worse. Your mother was in the car too. She survived because your father made a choice in the wreckage, her or the little girl. He chose to pull your mother out first. I felt vomit rise in my throat. My father hadn't just caused an accident. He'd chosen who lived and who died. And my mother knew. They both knew. For 30 years, they'd lived with that choice, and they'd punished Gerald for bearing witness to it. I drove straight to my parents' house, the letter crumpled in my fist, rage and betrayal burning through my veins. They were in the living room, my mother knitting, my father watching television like it was any other Thursday evening. Tell me about the accident, I said from the doorway, my voice shaking. They both froze. Tell me about the little girl who died 30 years ago. Tell me why Gerald Morrison spent 3 decades living next door while you built a fence and filed lawsuits and called him dangerous. My father's face went gray. Evelyn, you don't understand, then make me understand. I screamed. Because I just buried the man you taught me to fear, and his lawyer handed me a will that says you're murderers. The word hung in the air like smoke. My mother's knitting needles clattered to the floor. She stood up slowly, moved to the hallway closet, and returned with a cardboard box I'd never seen before. Dust covered the top. She set it on the coffee table between us, her hands trembling. Open it, she whispered. Inside were photographs. Documents. Newspaper clippings yellowed with age. Birth certificates. And on top, a picture of a little girl with dark curls and green eyes and a smile that looked hauntingly familiar. She was wearing a yellow dress and holding a stuffed rabbit. She looked exactly like me at that age, same face, same expression, same everything. I turned the photo over. Written on the back in faded ink, Sarah Morrison, age 5. The room tilted. Sarah Morrison. Gerald's last name. A 5-year-old girl. I looked up at my parents, comprehension dawning with the slow horror of a nightmare you can't wake from. Who is this? I asked, though some part of me already knew. My mother's face crumpled. My father couldn't meet my eyes. Your sister, my mother finally said, the words barely audible. Her name was Sarah. And she died because of us. Comment below, Sarah, if you think you know where this is going, because I promise you, the truth is so much darker than you can possibly imagine. The next chapter reveals who Gerald really was, and why my parents didn't just fail to save that little girl, they made sure the only witness spent 30 years in a prison of their own design. The photograph fell from my hands and drifted to the carpet like a fallen leaf. Sarah Morrison. My sister. A little girl who died 30 years ago, whose face was identical to mine, whose name I'd never heard until this moment. I looked at my parents, these people I'd known my entire life, and realized I'd never really known them at all. My father had aged a decade in the last 60 seconds, his face sagging like melted wax. My mother stood frozen by the couch, tears streaming silently down her cheeks. Tell me everything, I said, my voice cold and steady in a way I didn't recognize. Right now. Every single detail. Or I walk out that door and you never see me again. If you've ever had to choose between your family and the truth, hit that subscribe button, because what my parents confessed next proved that sometimes the people who raised you are strangers wearing familiar faces. My father poured himself a drink with shaking hands, whiskey, always whiskey, the liquid courage that had fueled 30 years of running from consequences. He drank it in one swallow, then spoke without looking at me. It was July 14, 1995. We were leaving your grandmother's house after a family dinner. Sarah was 5 years old. Your mother was 3 months pregnant with you. He paused, refilling his glass. I'd had too much to drink. Your mother knew it. But we fought about who would drive, and I grabbed the keys anyway. Gerald, your mother's father, your grandfather, tried to stop me. He stood in front of the car, told me I was in no condition, said he'd drive us home. I pushed him aside. Called him a controlling old man. Told him to stay out of our business. The words landed like physical blows. Gerald Morrison wasn't just a witness. He was family. He was my grandfather. The man my parents had spent 3 decades destroying was blood. My mother sank onto the couch, her voice hollow. We made it 3 miles before it happened. Sarah wasn't in her car seat properly. I'd been in such a hurry to leave, angry at my father for embarrassing us, I just buckled her in loosely. When your father swerved to avoid a dog in the road, her voice broke. She went through the windshield. The car flipped. I was trapped in the passenger seat, bleeding from a head wound. Sarah was on the pavement. And your father. She looked at him with something between love and hatred. He had seconds to decide. The car was leaking fuel. He could smell it. He pulled me out first. Because you were pregnant, I said numbly, trying to make sense of the nightmare unfolding before me. My father shook his head slowly. Because she was my wife, he said, and the honesty in those words was somehow more horrible than a lie. I chose her. Sarah was already, there was so much blood. I told myself she was gone, that I was saving the person I could still save. But I don't know. I'll never know if she was still alive when I made that choice. He drained his second glass. The car exploded 40 seconds later. By the time the ambulance arrived, Sarah was dead. Your mother survived. You survived. And Gerald arrived 2 minutes after the explosion, having followed us when we left because he knew something terrible would happen. Drop a comment, no excuse. Because there's no justification for what comes next, for how they transformed their guilt into 3 decades of cruelty toward the only man who tried to prevent it all. The hospital. The police reports. The accident investigation. My father had miraculously blown just under the legal limit when they tested him an hour later, enough time for his blood alcohol to drop, enough ambiguity to avoid criminal charges. Vehicular manslaughter while intoxicated became a tragic accident, a father's impossible choice, a family's devastating loss. But Gerald knew the truth. Gerald had seen my father stumbling to the car, had tried to intervene, had heard the argument. He became the living record of their failure, the witness who could destroy the narrative they were building. So we made a choice, my mother said, her voice gaining an edge of something defensive, almost defiant. We decided to survive. Your father couldn't go to prison, I was pregnant, traumatized, I'd just lost my daughter. We needed him. So when Gerald tried to give a statement to the police about your father's condition, we hired lawyers. We painted him as a vindictive father-in-law who'd always hated our marriage, who was trying to destroy us in our moment of grief. We got his statement suppressed. We made him look unstable, grief-stricken to the point of delusion. She met my eyes finally. And it worked. The case closed. We were free. But they weren't free. Freedom would have meant distance, separation, a clean break from the past. Instead, they'd done something infinitely crueler. You moved next door to him, I said, understanding flooding through me like poison. Sarah died in the house you grew up in, Gerald's house, the family home. And you moved into the property right next door. My father nodded. It went up for sale 6 months after the accident. Your mother inherited her childhood home, but she couldn't live there, too many memories of Sarah. So I bought the place next door. I told myself it was practical, that someone should be nearby to check on Gerald, that it was the responsible thing to do. He laughed bitterly. The truth? I wanted to watch him. Make sure he never talked. Make sure he stayed isolated, discredited, powerless. The fence went up when I turned 5. The same age Sarah had been when she died. My mother couldn't handle looking out the kitchen window and seeing me playing in the backyard, seeing Sarah's ghost in my movements, my laughter, my 5-year-old face. "You looked so much like her," my mother whispered. "Same hair, same eyes, same smile. And your grandfather kept trying to reach out to you. He'd stand at the fence and call your name, try to talk to you, tell you stories. I couldn't bear it. I couldn't let him near you. So they built the wall. 10 feet of cedar panels to block out the past, to keep the witness silent, to prevent the dead sister's ghost from contaminating the living daughter's childhood. Smash that like button if you've realized that sometimes the most dangerous people aren't strangers, they're the ones who tuck you in at night while hiding bodies in the backyard of their conscience. The lawsuits were strategic torture. Each one designed to drain Gerald's resources, to keep him in a constant state of legal defense, to ensure he could never afford to hire his own lawyers to challenge their version of events. "We made his life hell," my father said flatly. Every lawsuit was a reminder, stay quiet or we'll take everything. The property line dispute was fabricated. The tree root damage was exaggerated. The harassment claim. He trailed off, shame finally creeping into his voice. That one was pure invention. We needed something that would make him look dangerous, unstable. So we manufactured incidents, kept detailed logs of imaginary threatening behavior, built a paper trail that would destroy his credibility if he ever tried to tell the truth about the accident. I felt sick. For 30 years, my grandfather had lived in his daughter's childhood home, surrounded by memories of the granddaughter he'd lost and the granddaughter he was forbidden to know, while the people responsible for Sarah's death systematically destroyed his reputation, his finances, his will to fight back. Why didn't he just move away? I asked. Why stay next door to people who hated him? My mother's face twisted. "Because of you," she said simply. He told me once, during a brief moment when we were speaking civilly, that leaving would mean abandoning his only remaining grandchild. That as long as he lived next door, he could at least see you growing up, even if it was just glimpses through the fence. He said watching you was worth the pain we caused him. I grabbed the cardboard box and started pulling out documents. Newspaper clippings about the accident, carefully vague about the cause, emphasizing the tragedy rather than culpability. Birth certificates for both Sarah and me. Medical records from the hospital. Police reports with sections redacted. And photographs, dozens of them. Sarah as a newborn. Sarah's first birthday. Sarah at the beach, at Christmas, at preschool graduation. A whole life documented and then ended at age 5. Underneath the photos of Sarah were photos of me. My first day of kindergarten. My middle school graduation. My wedding to Marcus. Pictures I'd never seen before, taken from angles that suggested they were captured from a distance, through a fence, across a property line. He was watching me, I said, the words catching in my throat. My father nodded. For 30 years. We knew about it, caught him a few times with a camera. That's actually where the harassment lawsuit came from, those photos. But your mother. He looked at her. Tell her. My mother's voice was barely a whisper. I let him. I knew he was taking pictures, documenting your life from afar. And I let him because. She covered her face with her hands. Because I knew we'd taken everything else from him. His daughter. His granddaughter. His reputation. Letting him have those photographs felt like the least I could do. The smallest mercy in 30 years of cruelty. I left my parents' house with the cardboard box under my arm and drove to Gerald's property, my property now, according to his will. The house was dark, empty, waiting. I used the key Mr. Chen had given me and stepped inside. The air smelled like old books and loneliness. I flipped the light switch and gasped. Every wall was covered with photographs. Not just the stolen glimpses from across the fence, though those were there too, arranged chronologically like a visual timeline of my life. But also enlarged portraits, professional prints, candid shots that captured me laughing, thinking, living. My grandfather had created a gallery of the granddaughter he'd been forbidden to know, a shrine to the relationship stolen from both of us. If you're feeling that rage building in your chest, if you want to scream at the injustice of it all, subscribe right now, because what I found in his journals made me realize that my parents didn't just steal 30 years from Gerald. They stole them from me too. I found the journals in his bedroom closet, 17 leather-bound volumes spanning 3 decades. I sat on his bed, my bed now, and started reading. The first entry was dated August 1995, 1 month after the accident. Sarah is gone. My daughter killed her through negligence and cowardice, and her husband killed her through drunken stupidity. I tried to stop them. I failed. Now they're moving next door, and I know why. They want to keep me close, keep me silent, make sure I never tell anyone what really happened that night. I should move away. Start over somewhere they can't watch me. But then I'd lose Evelyn too. I've already lost one granddaughter. I won't abandon the other, even if she grows up never knowing my name. I read for hours. Years of entries documenting his isolated life, his grief, his desperate attempts to connect with me despite the barriers my parents erected. He wrote about standing at the fence when I was 6, trying to tell me a story about a brave princess, only to have my mother rush out and pull me inside while screaming at him to stay away. He wrote about attending my high school graduation from his car in the parking lot, too afraid to approach but unable to miss the moment. He wrote about the lawsuits, the legal bills, the deliberate destruction of his finances. And his decision never to fight back because any public battle would expose me to the truth about my sister's death, and he couldn't bear to traumatize me that way. The most devastating entries came from the years when I turned 5, when the fence went up. Today Evelyn turned 5 years old, he wrote. The same age Sarah was when she died. I watched through the window as they celebrated, a small party in the backyard I can no longer see. They built a fence today. 10 feet high. Solid panels. They've taken both my daughters now. Sarah is dead, and Evelyn might as well be. I stood in my yard and wept like a child, and no one came to check on me because no one in this neighborhood speaks to the dangerous old man anymore. The lies have worked. I am completely alone. But then I found the entry that changed everything. March 2003, I've made a decision. If I can't be part of Evelyn's life openly, I'll support her secretly. I've established a foundation. The Gerald Morrison Memorial Scholarship Fund. It will provide educational grants to exceptional students, and I'll make sure Evelyn is the first recipient. They'll never know the money comes from me. I'll also make anonymous donations to cover her expenses, school supplies, college application fees, medical bills. Whatever she needs. It's not a relationship. It's not what I wanted. But it's something. I can't hold her or talk to her or watch her grow up the way a grandfather should. But I can make sure she has every opportunity, every advantage, every chance at the life Sarah never got to live. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely turn the pages. Every scholarship I'd won. Every anonymous donor that had mysteriously covered my college tuition gaps. The grant that paid for my graduate school. The foundation that had given me money for my wedding when Marcus and I were struggling financially. All of it. Gerald. My grandfather, laundering his love through bureaucratic channels, finding ways to care for me despite the walls my parents had built. I'd thought I was accomplished, self-made, successful through my own merit. But behind every achievement was a ghost grandfather, moving pieces on a board I couldn't see, ensuring his forbidden granddaughter never struggled the way he did. The final journal entry was dated 3 weeks before his death. I'm dying. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4. The doctor gives me a month at most. I've updated my will, left everything to Evelyn. The house where her sister died. The money I should have spent on being a grandfather. The evidence I collected over 30 years, police reports they suppressed, witness statements they buried, recordings of their threats to destroy me if I ever told the truth. I could have used it. Could have exposed them, ruined them, gotten justice for Sarah. But I never did because Evelyn needed her parents more than she needed a grandfather she didn't know existed. Now I'm leaving her the choice I never made, expose them or let them live with their conscience. Either way, the truth comes out. He continued, I hope she doesn't hate me for my silence. I hope she understands that love sometimes looks like absence, like sacrifice, like standing behind a fence for 30 years just to catch glimpses of someone growing up without you. I failed Sarah. I couldn't stop her parents from killing her through their negligence. But I kept Evelyn safe in the only way I could, by staying away, by being the villain in her story so she could love her parents without reservation, by watching from the shadows and making sure she had everything she needed even if she never knew where it came from. If she's reading this now, if the lawyer has given her the journals as I instructed, then she knows. And maybe, just maybe, she'll forgive an old man who loved her the only way he was allowed to. I sat in his bedroom, my bedroom, and cried until I had no tears left. My grandfather had spent 30 years in a prison of my parents' design, suffering in silence to protect me from a truth I deserved to know. He'd loved me from a distance, supported me through anonymous channels, and died alone because my parents were cowards who chose their own comfort over his dignity. And I'd attended his funeral not as his granddaughter but as a stranger paying respects to a man everyone called dangerous. Mr. Chin arrived the next morning with additional documents. The evidence Gerald had collected over 3 decades was meticulous, damning, and completely actionable. Police reports showing the suppressed blood alcohol content. Witness statements from other family members at the dinner that night who'd seen my father drinking heavily. Recordings of phone conversations where my mother explicitly threatened Gerald with further legal action if he ever spoke about the accident. Medical records proving Sarah could have survived if she'd been pulled from the wreckage first. Everything needed to reopen the case, to charge my parents with negligent homicide, evidence tampering, witness intimidation, and fraud. Your grandfather never used any of this, Mr. Chin said quietly. He could have destroyed them at any time. But he told me, in our final meeting, that he loved you too much to take away your family. That you'd already lost one sister you never knew about, and he wouldn't make you lose your parents too. He handed me a sealed envelope. This is his final letter to you. He wanted you to have it after you'd read the journals, after you understood everything. I opened it with trembling hands. The letter was short, written in shaky handwriting, Evelyn, my darling granddaughter. Forgiveness is not something anyone can demand or deserve. It's something you give freely or not at all. I've forgiven your parents, though they never asked for it and never deserved it. I've forgiven them because holding on to hatred would have made Sarah's death mean nothing, would have poisoned the only thing I had left, my love for you. Whatever you decide to do with the evidence I've left you, know this, you owe me nothing. You owe them nothing. You owe yourself everything. The truth is yours now. Use it however you need to heal. I stood in Gerald's living room, my living room, staring at the photographs of a sister I'd never known and a grandfather who'd loved me from the shadows. My phone buzzed. My mother, texting, please come home. We need to talk. We can explain everything. But they'd already explained everything. 30 years of explanations built on lies, fences, and lawsuits. 30 years of choosing their comfort over everyone else's pain. I thought about Gerald's final words, forgiveness is something you give freely or not at all. I wasn't sure I had forgiveness in me. But I had a choice. Expose them, destroy them, let the legal system finally hold them accountable for Sarah's death. Or let them live with their conscience, knowing that I knew, that Gerald had documented everything, that their comfortable life was built on a child's grave and an old man's suffering. I made my decision 3 weeks later. I moved into Gerald's house permanently, renamed it Morrison House, and placed a bronze plaque by the front door, in memory of Sarah Morrison, 1990 to 1995, and Gerald Morrison, 1952 to 2025. Both loved beyond measure. Both deserved better. I filed paperwork to have the 10-foot fence removed, every panel, every post, every barrier my parents had built to hide their guilt. Now they wake up every morning and see that plaque. They see me living in the house where their daughter died, sleeping in my grandfather's bed, walking through rooms that document their 30-year campaign of cruelty. They can't escape it. They can't fence it out. They have to live next door to the truth they tried to bury, watching their surviving daughter honor the family they destroyed. I didn't expose them. Gerald was right, I'd already lost too much. But I made them live with the consequences of every choice they'd made, every lie they'd told, every lawsuit they'd filed against a grieving grandfather who only wanted to love his granddaughter. They destroyed Gerald Morrison's life to protect themselves. Now they get to spend whatever years they have left staring at the evidence of exactly what they destroyed. Sometimes revenge isn't about punishment. It's about making sure the truth can never be buried again. It's about living loudly in the space where silence used to reign. It's about honoring the people who loved you from the shadows by bringing them into the light. My parents spent 30 years building a fence to hide their guilt. Gerald spent 30 years loving me through it. I finally understand what he meant about danger, not him, but the secrets we bury, the walls we build, and the families we destroy to protect ourselves from consequences we deserve. Sarah Morrison died because two people chose convenience over responsibility. Gerald Morrison died alone because those same two people chose silence over accountability. I'm done letting their choices define my family's story. The fence is gone. The truth is visible. And every single day, from their kitchen window, my parents see exactly what they've lost. Final question for the comments: would you have exposed them, or would you have done what I did? Drop expose or silent revenge below, and if you made it this far, you know what happened to my grandfather was unforgivable. Subscribe so you never miss stories about the secrets families bury and the people who pay the price for other people's choices. Because sometimes the most dangerous person in your life is the one sitting across from you at dinner, pretending everything is fine.